Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm gonna begin a brand new retrospective focusing on The Wire, and in this video I'm gonna be covering season 1. So the 20th anniversary of The Wire was over a week ago as of this recording, and that's kind of why I chose to watch and review it eventually on this channel. So yeah, here we are. So before we delve into season 1, let's talk a little bit about the history of The Wire. The Wire is a crime drama set in the city of Baltimore, and while it does retain several recurring characters throughout its run, each season has something different to offer. Whether it's the police investigating an illegal drug trade, or corruption at the docks, the education system, or the media, there's something for everyone here. The show was created by David Simon, and according to him, it was loosely inspired by the experiences of his writing partner Ed Burns, who is a former homicide detective and school teacher. The show lasted for 5 seasons and ran from 2002 to 2008 and spanned 60 episodes. And while it is essentially a crime drama, David Simon has often described the show as really being about the American city and how Americans live together in it, as well as the various compromises and challenges that Americans have to face, regardless of who they are and what they do for a living. Despite not having the best ratings in TV history, along the lines of The Walking Dead, 24, and Game of Thrones, and so on, and despite not winning any awards either, today it is often regarded as one of the greatest TV shows of all time. As for me, I have to agree with that. It is exceptional television, and some even call it the greatest TV show of all time, and that's perfectly fine. Despite having a following of sorts in the 2000s, the show wasn't all that popular because it featured a predominantly black cast, and there weren't many shows to do that at the time. The time slot was very poor, the complexity of the story wasn't for everyone, and the excessive amounts of profanity and slang and other forms of explicit content meant that it definitely wasn't for all ages. And aside from just wanting to review the show now around the 20th anniversary, this was something I've always been curious to check out because it was one of those shows that I knew about growing up, but I was obviously underage for. And especially now, given how times have changed, it reminds me of the good old days, the 2000s, which was when I grew up. Now don't get me wrong, not everything about the 2000s was great, but there are things about those days that today's kids will never understand. Things that bring back a lot of great memories for me. And also just the fact that it had so many recognizable names in the cast. Now these guys were relatively unknown or lesser known at the time, but now they're practically stars. We're talking about Idris Elba, Michael B. Jordan, Wood Harris, Larry Gillard Jr., Dominic West, Aidan Gillen, Seth Gilliam, and of course the late great Michael K. Williams, may he rest in peace. Okay, so now that the history lesson's out the way, let's jump straight into season 1. So season 1 revolves around 2 groups of characters: the Baltimore Police Department and the drug dealing organization that they are trying to take down, known as the Barksdale organization. That's pretty much what this season revolves around, and I really enjoyed it. I think it's a great start to such an amazing series. So let's get into it. So first of all, I really like the style of this show. It's shot in a very realistic way, which in itself also gives the show its own rawness, if you will. It's not like Breaking Bad or The Sopranos or anything like that, even though those shows, much like The Wire, are also grounded in reality. Though every once in a while there'll be something inventive and out of the ordinary, like a scene in the 4th episode, Odd Cases, where the F-bomb is dropped numerous times very quietly when a crime scene is being investigated. It's one of the best scenes in the whole show. Even the storytelling is pretty cool, and it may surprise a lot of younger viewers out there. You know, a lot of events actually occur off screen, and the show doesn't rely on cliffhangers or anything like that, which is a common trope nowadays. There's little to no forms of artificial exposition, you know, like voiceovers and flashbacks and all that kind of stuff. And it's all done in an effort to enhance the realism of the show. The themes explored in not only this season but throughout the show include institutional dysfunction, urban life, and surveillance, which is a pretty big deal considering the police often resort to wiretaps, especially when characters are using payphones, pagers, or those old school cell phones from the 2000s. And that's another reminder of what things were like back then. You know, we didn't have social media, we didn't have smartphones, and things were a lot simpler back then. The show also opts for gray morality as opposed to the traditional black and white morality because it's focusing on the city of Baltimore as a whole. And when you think about it, there aren't really any good or bad guys on the show at all, you know? And at times, it'll make you as a viewer question who you're really supposed to root for. I also like the title sequence as well as the theme music. It's one of those really lengthy title sequences. It goes on for about 90 seconds. And in each season, there's a variation of not only the song, but the sequence itself, which I thought was really cool. And at the very end, there's a quote referencing a line of dialogue within the episode. Then we have the characters. Now, there's quite a few characters on this show, and this is going to take up a huge chunk of the video, so I'm not going to delve into each and every single one, but I'll briefly summarize them to the best of my ability. First of all, you have Jimmy McNulty, played by Dominic West. McNulty is a detective working for the Baltimore Police Department, and he believes that he is far more intelligent than his peers, to the point where his willingness to disobey the chain of command can often result in him incurring the wrath of his superiors. Aside from that, he has many other problems off the job, such as alcoholism, alimony, child support, adultery, sexual promiscuity, and unstable relationships, which makes sense considering he's divorced with 2 kids. This to me is a prime example of a main protagonist done right, especially a police detective, and Dominic West's performance was incredible. Then you have Kima Griggs. Kima is a narcotics detective who often outshines her colleagues, earning her high esteem. She lives with her domestic partner and girlfriend, Cheryl. Now these two aren't married because obviously at that time, same-sex marriage was still illegal in the US. The two may be in love, but they have their differences from time to time, and these particular conflicts are interesting to watch. Then there's Hawk and Carver, 2 detectives who work alongside Kima in narcotics. They're essentially comic relief, but as a pair they work really well together. Though later on in the show, they have to learn to work apart given their career choices and what have you. And Carver may look familiar because he's played by Seth Gilliam, who is also Father Gabriel on The Walking Dead. And he's not the only Walking Dead actor who appeared on The Wire. Then we have my favorite character, Bubbles. Bubbles is a homeless addict and a criminal informant for Kima. He and Johnny Weeks, his younger white friend and protege if you will, run scams on the streets involving counterfeit money. Now because I haven't actually finished watching the show as of this recording, I'm still finishing up season 4 and then I have to get to season 5. I don't know what happens to Bubbles at the end, but I'm really enjoying his journey so far and I hope he has a good send-off at the end. There's also Bunk, McNulty's gifted, dry-witted, and heavy-drinking partner. There's Rhonda Perlman, who's the legal liaison, or the middleman if you will, between the police and the courthouse. You've got Roland Przebluski, aka Prez, who is one of the more incompetent and inept detectives, and it's because of that he's dumped on this case with McNulty and the others. He may not seem like much now, but later on in the show he becomes way more complex and likable, especially in season 4. There's Cedric Daniels, played by Lance Reddick. Cedric is the lieutenant of the Baltimore Police Department, and is often well regarded, mainly due to his commitment towards making his subordinates do do decent police work and commit quality arrests. He often has disagreements with other high-ranking officers, but for the most part, he gets his job done. And the last detective I'll mention is Lester Freeman. While he tends to be very reserved and quiet, he soon proves to be a very methodical and experienced investigator, with a knack for noticing important details, especially when it comes to the actual wiretap, and keeping track of public records and paper trails and so on. Now moving on to the Barksdale organization. Firstly, we have the big boss himself, Avon Barksdale, played by Wood Harris. Avon is one of the most ruthless and powerful drug dealers in all of Baltimore. He is very shrewd and intuitive and accepts nothing less than absolute power. And this character was partly based on a real-life gang leader who ran his operations in West Baltimore. Then we have Avon's second in command, Stringer Bell, played by Idris Elba. Stringer prioritizes the business side of things in the Barksdale organization. He often shuns Avon for his approach to professionalism, as well as his general flamboyance. He often insulates himself from direct connectivity to the drug trade by means of money laundering and investing in housing development. And so this was essentially the role that made Idris Elba a household name before he took on the likes of Luther and Heimdall in the MCU. Then we have D'Angelo, the nephew of Avon Barksdale, played by Larry Gillard Jr. D'Angelo is a lieutenant for Avon and operates most of the drug trade in West Baltimore. He's kind of a middleman in the organization because he's stuck between the top and the bottom of it. The thing about D'Angelo is that he's pretty much an everyman, doing what he has to do to pay the bills and put food on the table, regardless of what it is he's doing exactly and who he's doing it for and why. And over time, his commitments to the organization begin to wear on his conscience. And it's because of all of this that he ended up being one of my absolute favorite characters on the show. There's also Bodie, who starts out as a low-level drug dealer, but slowly matures throughout the show and remains loyal to the Barksdale organization through thick and thin. He's got two friends by the names of Poot and Wallace. Poot has a very active sex life despite his age. He was about 16 in season 1. And Wallace, who's played by a then teenage Michael B. Jordan, is also involved in the drug trade, but doesn't fully realize that this sort of thing comes at a price. And speaking of these guys, D'Angelo has them set up somewhere in the projects in this place he calls the Pit, and some of the best scenes of the first season take place here. So that pretty much covers the Barksdale organization, but there is one more character I'd like to mention, and that's of course Omar Little, played by Michael K. Williams. Omar is a notorious stick-up man who roams the streets of Baltimore, robbing drug dealers wherever he can. And wherever he goes, he carries a shotgun, a large caliber handgun, a bulletproof vest. He's recognizable for his facial scar, which is Michael K. Williams' actual facial scar. And of course, every time he stalks his targets, he whistles Farmer and the Dell. And yeah, I think that pretty much sums up all the characters. Let's move on. Aside from all the characters, this first season alone has so many iconic and memorable scenes. The opening scene to the pilot, the scene in episode 4 that I mentioned earlier, the chicken nugget scene in the pit, as well as the chess scene in the pit, as well as a few suspenseful moments and shocking character deaths here and there. And the finale was perfect. In some ways, the show could have ended here and you could have left the rest to your imagination, but it still sets up season 2 in all the right ways. And like every other season finale on the show, towards the end, there's a 5-minute montage with a song playing in the background, and yeah, it works well, not only here, but in all of them. Now, the only complaint I have with season 1 is the fact that the first 4 or 5 episodes out of all 13 can be a bit overwhelming because it's just the beginning of the show. You know, you're still being introduced to Baltimore and the characters. You're still trying to figure out who's who and what's what, given how complex the show is. And it does take its time in getting there and establishing everything. Now, upon rewatch, this may not be all that much of an issue, but even then, it's still kind of a slog to get through those episodes. But other than that, I thought this was a brilliant debut to the show. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Season 1 of The Wire. Next time we're going to look at Season 2, the season focusing on the docks. So thank you all for watching, guys. Please be sure to like the video, share it and subscribe, ring the bell, be safe during this time, and I'll see you soon.